Welcome to today's webinar on family violence risk screening and risk assessment tools. 1-800-RESPECT are glad to welcome your presenter, Jane French. Jane is a psychologist with an extensive background in child protection as a practitioner, manager, trainer and policy developer. She spent 3 years working for KPMG as a human services advisor and manager and was involved in the development of the Victorian Risk Assessment and Risk Management Framework that has been adopted by a number of jurisdictions. Jane is currently the Director of Human Services for Medibank Health Solutions, and her current focus sees her taking on a lead advisory role for the Royal Commission into institutional responses to child sexual assault. This webinar is live and interactive. You are encouraged to participate by posing questions to the presenter. These can be typed into the message box, which is located at the bottom left-hand side of your screen. Please note that the questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. After the session, you will be directed to an online survey, as your feedback does help us to improve the running of future 1-800-RESPECT webinars. We also encourage you to participate in the discussion tool, which you will be redirected to after completing the survey. We will be closing this thread at 2:45 p.m. I'd now like to pass to Jane to begin today's webinar.
Thanks, Michelle, and hello everybody, and welcome to this second webinar that we're running as part of 1-800-RESPECT. So thank you for having me along today. Before we get into the topic of risk screening and risk assessment, I guess I just wanted to say a few words about the approach that I'll be taking today. We know that family violence is most commonly perpetuated against women and children, although certainly acknowledge that men can be the victims of family violence as well, and that it can occur across a wide variety of relationship types. But predominantly this 1-800-RESPECT is part of the government's ongoing strategy to reduce violence against women and children, so that's the approach we're taking. And throughout the presentation I will be talking about women and children primarily who experience family violence. At times I use the language of victims and perpetrators too when we're talking about risk factors particularly, and how risk factors relate to either the victim or the perpetrator. So just having said that, let's proceed and get on with the presentation. So the idea of today is that I'll take you through and give you an overview of risk screening and risk assessment, and for each of these different tools we'll look at what each of them are, what is a risk screening tool, what are the common features of these tools, and who should use them and how should they be used. And the same for risk assessment. What is a family violence risk assessment tool, what are the common features, and how should they be used. So the first question that I guess we pose when talking about risk screening and risk assessment is why are they needed? And the answer to that is that the nature of family violence is such that it often remains hidden, and we've learnt that we do need tools to help us identify the presence of family violence and the level of risk that people are experiencing as a result of that. We know that males who perpetuate family violence against women and children have a pattern of behaviour that's controlling, threatening and coercive, and it's certainly not easy for people to come out and talk about what they may be experiencing if they're currently experiencing that controlling and those threats. So that just goes to the nature of family violence, that we obviously need to understand that there are some common elements that are consistent across a whole range of definitions of family violence, and those common features are that violent behaviour is repeated, controlling, threatening and coercive. It occurs between people who have had or are having an intimate relationships, and in most cases it's violent behaviour. It's part of a range of tactics used by males to exercise power and control over women and children, and obviously we know that family violence can be both criminal and non-criminal in nature, with the non-criminal focusing on controlling access to finances or what women and children can do and where and who they can be in contact with. So community attitudes also play a big part in why we need to have risk screening and risk assessment tools, and while as a community we've come a long way in our understanding of family violence, there's still a great deal of work to be done. So every couple of years there's a national community survey around community attitudes to violence against women, and on this slide here there's some results from the 2009 survey. So still in our community 22% of people believe that domestic violence is perpetuated equally by both men and women. 34% of people surveyed believe that rape results from men being unable to control their need for sex, so that's a third of the community almost. 13% of people still agree that women often say no when they mean yes, and 1 in 6 people still think that a woman is partly responsible if she's raped when drunk or drug affected. 1 in 5 believe that violence can be excused if the perpetrator later regrets what they've done. And I guess the big one for me is that 8 in 10 people in the community say it's hard to understand why women stay in violent relationships. And I think that makes it particularly hard for women to come forward when they know that 8 out of 10 people that they're going to be communicating with are not going to understand why she's in the situation that she's in. So all of those reasons I think are pretty solid ones for why we should risk screen and do risk assessments. But another factor that's emerged over the last 10 years or so, and certainly made governments around Australia sit up and take notice, is the financial cost of the impacts of family violence. So it was some work done. It was done in Victoria. It was done some years back, but it was reprinted by Vic Health in 2010, and it's certainly worth a look. They looked at the burden of disease associated with family violence, and that's looking at what percentage of problems are caused by a particular issue. So what this work told us was that family violence or violence against women contributes to 9% of healthcare problems for women aged between 18 and 40, and that's almost double the levels associated with excessive alcohol and illicit drug use. So I think that those findings certainly made governments of the day sit up and take notice and recognise the need to do something from a financial and a healthcare perspective for women and children ongoing. We also obviously know that for children exposed to family violence, there's a broad range of outcomes that are negative, that impact on children's health and well-being and education and social development across a number of years, many years in some cases. So now to get on to talk about risk screening. So risk screening tools essentially assist in identifying someone who may be experiencing family violence for all those reasons that I've just outlined, that people don't come forward about it, people worry they won't be understood, and they're also coming from a place where they may be threatened or experiencing controlling behaviour. So risk assessment is often done in settings where it's routinely applied to all clients that enter the service. So certainly there are a number of hospitals around Australia that routinely screen in maternity wards for the presence of family violence, and the example that I know is that maternal and child health nurses in Victoria, who see just about every mother and newborn baby, routinely ask if the woman is feeling safe and whether family violence is something that she needs help with. So it's often applied in that way as a routine whole of population screening tool. And the purpose of the screening tool is to basically help workers at a community level to identify the presence of family violence and then make it an appropriate referral if they detect that violence is an issue. So most screening tools are brief and include questions that can help to trigger a conversation about family circumstances and to identify if someone may be at risk. And I guess that's the key message. It's about starting a conversation. So risk screening tools are usually brief and they involve between 1 and 6 questions. The jury's still out in terms of validity and reliability of these tools, and by that I mean they're not 100% guaranteed to detect family violence. So even though a woman might answer no to a whole range of questions about whether she's at risk of family violence, that doesn't, just because she says no, doesn't necessarily guarantee that she's safe. So they always used to be used within that context and from that point of understanding. These tools need to be administered when women are not in the presence of their partner, obviously, because women are unlikely to indicate that they are feeling threatened by their husband or partner if he's present. And risk screening tools often screen for risk in relation to both women and children. So the key take-out message, I guess, in using risk screening tools is that they must be used in the context of partnerships and pathways to family violence agencies and police. So there's no point risk screening unless you know what you're going to do if you get a result that says this person needs some help and I need to do something about it. So we've got some examples of risk screening tools here for you. The first one is from the Family Relationship Centre's framework and the Family Relationship Advice Line framework around risk screening. So the questions here that they ask routinely are, do you have any reason to be concerned about your own safety or the safety of your children? Do you have any other concerns about your children's well-being at the moment? Do you have any reason to be concerned about the safety of anyone else? How do you think your partner or ex-partner would answer these questions? And obviously family relationship centres are working with families often in the context of separation, and as we'll learn later, that is one of the key risk factors associated with risk in family violence. New South Wales Health risk screening tool asks, within the last year? Have you been hit, slapped or hurt in other ways by your partner or ex-partner? Are you frightened of your partner or ex-partner? And if the woman answers yes to these questions, then follow-up questions are asked, which are you safe to go home when you leave here? And would you like some assistance with this? One other risk screening example, and this is one that I'm most familiar with, is from the Common Risk Assessment and Management Framework in Victoria, often referred to as the CRAF. The risk screening tool in the CRAF is the policy encourages all community services to use this risk screening approach in their ongoing role in assessment and case management of people. So the questions here are you ever afraid of someone in your family or household, and if so, who? Has someone in your family or household ever put you down, humiliated you or tried to control what you can or cannot do? Has someone in your family or household ever threatened to hurt you? Has someone ever pushed, hit, kicked, punched or otherwise hurt you? Are you worried about your children or someone else in your family or household? And would you like help with any of this now? So a broad-ranging list of questions that again are designed to open up a conversation so that someone, I guess, has the space to indicate if any of these things are concerning them and relevant for them now. So just to wrap up in relation to risk screening, some take-out messages that risk screening is often prescribed in government policy or program policy, so certainly encourage everyone involved online today to check with their program and sector policy frameworks and determine whether there is a requirement to screen for family risk in the sector that you work in. Should certainly be, risk screening questions can obviously be built into any ongoing assessment and case management practice of workers and professionals, and should be part of an ongoing conversation about safety and wellbeing. And always, as I've indicated before, be accompanied by clear referral protocols through to specialist family violence services if family violence is detected. So we're going to do a quick poll just to get you involved a little bit. How many of you currently screen for the presence of family violence in your role? How many of you actually use risk screening tools as part of your ongoing assessment and practice? We've got results coming in. It's a bit like watching a race. It's going up and down. Overwhelmingly, we've got people saying yes. So that's fantastic. We've got 20% of people involved today indicating that they don't routinely use risk screening tools. So again, that encouragement to go back to your organisation and have a think about where risk screening for family violence might fit in the context of the work you do in the community. Okay, we'll move on from there. Thanks, Michelle. So we're moving on to talk about risk assessment now. Just to give you some definitions, risk is the product of the likelihood of an event occurring and the consequences of the event occurring. And that's what needs to be weighed up in any risk assessment. If the likelihood of an event occurring is extremely high but the consequence of that event is low, then professional judgment needs to be used to determine what the ultimate level of risk is. So it's a process whereby the level of risk to an individual is determined. Again, risk assessment should always be accompanied by referral protocols, safety planning and risk management strategies. There's a lot of research around about risk assessment, and the research identifies that there are usually 3 elements to an assessment of family violence risk. Those 3 elements are the victim's own view of their risk. So people who are experiencing family violence often have a very accurate view of the level of risk they are at. So when women say, I'm scared he will kill me, we need to take that very seriously. And there are studies that demonstrate that the victim's own view of their level of risk have more validity and reliability than all the fancy screening tools that may be out there. The other element of risk assessment is the identification or the presence of evidence-based risk factors, and that's what we're going to focus on largely in the rest of this presentation, looking at the risk factors that the evidence tells us are linked most commonly with poor outcomes and violent outcomes for women and children. The third factor, and most risk assessment tools in Australia rely on professional judgment. And professional judgment is, I guess, made up of your qualifications and your experience, the supervision you get, and your understanding of the complexities around family violence theory. And really, risk assessment at this level should always be done by a professional who's very well qualified and experienced in family violence, so that they've got that layer of professional judgment to view the assessment through. So in practice, as I've said, there are a range of assessment tools that are used and that are available. None of them, again, are perfect predictors of risk, and if you detect risk, you need to make an appropriate referral. But awareness of evidence-based risk factors will certainly help you, community workers or health workers, if you're not experts in family violence, to get a strong sense of when expert help is needed and when a referral should be made. Just a final word on reliability and validity. So there's been research done, and I've just put up some research here from 2008 that identified 4 tools that you could find online that have been found to have reasonable validity in assessing and predicting the risks associated for women and children with family violence. But again, these should be used in the hands of professionals with great experience around family violence. But they're online and something that you might like to have a look at down the track. So what we're going to do in the next few slides is look at the risk factors associated with both the victim, the perpetrator and their relationship, and these are taken from the assessment framework that I'm obviously most familiar with, which is the Victorian Risk Assessment and Risk Management Framework. But again, these evidence-based risk factors are common to most risk assessment frameworks that are out there. So looking at it from the perspective of the victim or the woman or person experiencing family violence, I've already touched on their own assessment of the level of risk being a really good predictor of future risk, and in fact being a better predictor than most tools out there. Pregnancy is another risk factor. It's not uncommon for family violence to commence or intensify during pregnancy, hence routine risk screening occurring in maternity hospitals and maternal and child health centres around the country. Depression or mental health issue, a pre-existing condition, or that may develop as a result of the violence, but victims who are vulnerable to depression and mental health issues may experience increased vulnerability to family violence, partly because of their circumstances and partly because it makes it harder to access help, or their resilience is certainly down. Drug and alcohol misuse on the behalf of the victim is also another factor in increasing risk, so that needs to be taken into account when doing a risk assessment, that using alcohol or other drugs can lead to increased vulnerability to violence. Suicidal ideas or previous attempts to commit suicide also indicate that the person experiencing family violence is extremely vulnerable and that the situation has become critical and that urgent help is needed. And people who experience family violence who are isolated are also at increased risk. So isolation may occur as a result of the perpetrator displaying controlling behaviour, which may result in the victim having, or the person experiencing the violence, to have fewer social supports. And this may be a factor where people have a disability or limited social interaction and support. So where a victim is more vulnerable, there is a far greater likelihood of violence, particularly if they're isolated from family, friends and social networks. The asterisk, as we go through these risk factors, the asterisk indicates that these risk factors are associated with an increased risk of lethality, or the person experiencing violence being killed by their partner. So watch out for the asterisks as we go through. So the next couple of slides are looking at the risk factors associated with the perpetrator, and there's quite a few asterisks in this list. But the use of a weapon in the most recent event of violence indicates a high level of seriousness in the situation. We know that previous behaviour is likely to predict future behaviour. So if weapons have been used once, it's likely that they'll be used again. Having access to weapons is pretty concerning. Perpetrators who have access to weapons, particularly guns, are much more likely to seriously injure or kill a victim than those without access. Where perpetrators have previously harmed or threatened to harm the victim, so we know that psychological and emotional abuse are good predictors of continued abuse, including physical abuse, and previous physical assaults also predict future assaults. Strangulation or choking is a common method of killing by male perpetrators of female victims, so previous attempts to choke victims need to be viewed very seriously. And evidence also suggests that credible threats to kill victims made by perpetrators are often genuine. So again, it needs to be taken very seriously if women are saying he's threatened to kill me. Further risk factors with some more asterisks here is stalking. Stalkers, males who stalk are more likely to be violent if they've had an intimate relationship with the victim. Stalking, when coupled with physical assault, is strongly connected to murder or attempted murder. So stalking behaviour and obsessive thinking are highly correlated and need to be taken seriously. Same with sexual assault. If there's been a sexual assault, that correlates with a high likelihood of further violence against the woman, and again is a predictor of lethality. Perpetrators who breach or disregard intervention orders demonstrate little concern for the law and law enforcement agencies and are therefore more likely to continue to breach the law. Drug or alcohol misuse or abuse on behalf of the perpetrator. So serious problems with drug, alcohol or prescription drugs or inhalants lead to impairment in social functioning and create a risk of family violence, and this also includes temporary drug-induced psychosis. And also obsessive and jealous behaviour towards the victim has been found to be associated with lethal assault as well. Other risk factors associated with the perpetrator: controlling behaviours. Men who think they should be in charge are more likely to use various forms of violence against their partner, and complete control of the victim's activities and extreme jealousy have been associated with severe battering. Unemployment is associated with an increased risk of a lethal assault, and in addition, a sudden change in employment status, such as being terminated or retrenched, may also increase the risk. Perpetrators with mental health problems, particularly depression, have also been found to be correlated with murder-suicide outcomes in family violence. Mental health issues such as depression and paranoid psychosis can also elevate the risk. So the presence of a mental health issue has to be carefully considered in relation to the other factors, and obviously urgent referrals and help needed. Perpetrators with a history of violence are more likely to use violence against family members. We also know that. So if a male is violent or someone is violent outside of their family, they're likely to be violent within the home as well. Other risk factors associated with the perpetrator relate to threats. So where there's been previous harms or threats to the children, to other family members, to pets or other animals, or the perpetrator has previously threatened or tried to commit suicide themselves, all of those threats need to be taken very seriously. And just to go back to the pets or other animals, research tells us that there's a correlation between cruelty to animals and family violence. It's being increasingly recognised. So there is actually there's established a direct link between family violence and pets being abused or killed. So the use of threats against pets can be used as leverage by perpetrators to control family members. You leave me and I'll kill the dog, or I'll take the dog, or things like that. So finally, we just look at the risk factors that are associated with the relationship, and they are separation, escalation and financial difficulties, sort of situational factors surrounding the couple's relationship. So for women who are experiencing family violence, the critical periods of high risk around separation is immediately prior to taking action to separate, during the initial stages of separation, and immediately afterwards. So when women say that they stay with the perpetrator because they're afraid to leave, they are pretty genuinely accurately anticipating that the level of risk will increase the risk of the violence in the future. So the data on separating suggests that women are particularly at risk within the first 2 months of separation. Escalation is a factor. That's when violence is occurring more often or becoming worse. That has been associated with high risk and with lethal outcomes for women and children victims, and also low income and financial stress, including addiction. So gambling addiction, for example, are also risk factors for family violence. So that's a very quick run through of the evidence-based risk factors that are common across a range of risk assessment tools and frameworks, but taken from the Victorian framework. What I want to do now is just give us a chance to do some thinking and do a bit of a risk assessment ourselves. So I'm going to play you a snippet from an interview that Andrew Denton did on Enough Rope. It's going back some years now, but it's with Ingrid Poulsen, whose estranged husband killed her children and her father after they separated. Ingrid's gone on to become an advocate for reforms to the way family violence is managed in New South Wales in particular. So as we listen to this clip, it goes for about 2 minutes, and I just want you to note down based on the risk factors that I just ran through, how many risk factors and what are they? What do you identify? What can you hear in terms of risk as Ingrid speaks? So just a bit of a warning that she goes into a fair bit of detail about the violence, although it's not graphic detail, but certainly if people don't want to listen to her individual account, feel free to mute your computer, and if you keep an eye on the chat box on the left-hand corner, we'll let you know when the clip's finished. Otherwise, we'll go to that. The first clip now is Andrew Denton introducing Ingrid.
Here's a fact. 1 in 4 relationships in Australia will be scarred by domestic violence. It's a subject tinged with shame and too often kept out of sight. Not for my next guest. 3 years ago, her estranged partner killed both her children and her father before killing himself. She believes the system that should have protected her family let her down, and now she's trying to change it step by step to spare others the hell she's been through. Please welcome Ingrid Paulsen.
So that's the introduction, and now we'll just listen to the 2 minutes or so of Ingrid being interviewed by Andrew around the circumstances leading up to the death. Thanks.
We'd been having problems for a while that turned around differences between us, but the final straw was violence. He started to become violent, and there was one night in particular where he started to throw things around the room, and it was while the children were in the room, and I just thought that's unforgivable, so I barricaded myself in the room and left the next day.
He didn't take the estrangement well, did he? He rang you persistently.
He did.
When did what appeared to be harassment move to something more threatening?
He had spoken threats on the phone, basically to intimidate me into coming back to him. But I went to work one day and came back, and there was a letter on the windscreen of my car which stated that he was going to kill me and himself.
His behaviour became more erratic after that. Can you explain what happened when you went to pick up the children after an access visit one night?
He basically tricked me into coming into the house by saying that he had cooked dinner for us and that it was ready, and when I went in there was no dinner. And he started to beg me to come back and cry and crawl around on the ground and say that, well, he'd set up the flat for me to come back and I was not interested in this. And I actually made a move to the telephone to call my father to help come and mediate, because I felt like it was getting out of control and I didn't like him behaving in that manner in front of the kids. So, and at that point he went into the kitchen and took off his jacket and said, "There's $6,000 in my bank account, it can pay for my funeral." And picked up a knife and went to go at his throat. And because the kids were with him in the kitchen, then I raced around and basically wrestled this knife off him and calmed him down. And I wanted to take the children and leave, but he said, "If you take Marley, then I'll do it. I'll die right now." So I took my son and left and called the police.
Thank you. So we will do a quick poll. Quick poll now on how many risk factors did you identify? So we've got from 1 to 8. Just as you listen to Ingrid's talking, how many risk factors did you find? Results are coming through. Some popular choices are 5, 6, 7. 6 looks like it's winning. 6 risk factors is probably the most common response. So, and just to go through them, these are the ones that I identified. So he was certainly becoming violent. I guess I found 8, but you know, it's professional judgment needs to be applied. The ex-partner was becoming violent. He was escalating. He'd started throwing things. They were estranged. He was harassing and started to, I guess, stalk her on the telephone. He made threats to her. He had access to a weapon, and we know that the knife that he used a weapon in the most recent incident where he pulled that knife, and he made a threat to kill himself. So the conclusion to Ingrid's story is that, the other factor that you wouldn't have heard in that clip was that he also breached the first intervention order she took out within a matter of hours. And a couple of days after the incident that Ingrid talks about there, he came back to the house and raped her, and then when she was off getting treatment for that and her father was looking after her children, the ex-husband came back and murdered Ingrid's father and her 2 children. So that's the story there, and Ingrid has gone on, as I said, to be a strong advocate for reforms around coordinated practice and risk assessment, and making sure that all professionals involved in helping people at a grassroots level understand the risk factors associated with family violence. So we'll get rid of those poll results now, and just move on, just to wrap things up. So risk assessment, I've taken you through the evidence base there, but it's complex, and professionals trained in working with victims of family violence should be using risk assessment tools. I think it's helpful for all workers involved in community and health settings to have an understanding of what the risk factors are, so that if they identify the presence of these risk factors when working with clients, an immediate referral can be made to family violence or to the police. Collaborative practice is definitely the key in protecting women and children and people in the community from family violence, and we'll just give Ingrid Paulson the last say, again just quickly, to explain why that's so important. Thank you.
Okay, domestic violence needs to be taken out of the cupboard, really, and looked at for what it is.
Which is?
It's people caught in a situation they don't feel, they can't really get out of.
And I think that does sum it up beautifully, that people who may be experiencing family violence are caught up in a situation that's beyond their control and that they can't get out of. And the research is clear and tells us that we need to help people to be able to explain or indicate that they are experiencing family violence and do need help with that. So that's it from me. Thank you all for your time and for listening, and I'm going to hand back to our moderator, Michelle, to wrap things up for us.
Thank you, Jane, and thanks for that great presentation. We are now going to open up for a few questions for Jane to answer. So if you would like to ask a question, please do so by typing your question into the chat box at the bottom left of your screen. Please note that Jane will not be able to answer any questions that are specific to your jurisdiction. So while we're just waiting for a few questions to come through, I would just like to remind everyone that we do have another webinar coming up on Thursday the 14th of November on domestic and family violence and called communities. So you will be receiving the invitation for this webinar via email in your inboxes shortly, and we would love to see you register and come along to our next webinar as well. We have had a few questions come through about the slides being available after the webinar and whether people can have a copy. And I have been notified that the slides will be available, and the 1-800-RESPECT team will notify you on how to view these. So we have had a few questions come through for you, Jane. Our first one comes from Hua. He'd like to know, has a question regarding sexual assault been considered in the questions or tools?
Look, I'm not familiar with every screening tool out there, and it's possible that it is in some cases, but given that the evidence says that sexual assault is an indicator of risk, I think it's reasonable to use that as a guide if sexual assault has occurred by an intimate partner, that there is significant risk there. But as to whether it's in any tools, I couldn't give you specifics just because there are a huge range of tools out there.
Okay, great. We do have another question from Laura. She'd like to know, do you have any advice for workers who only speak with people over the phone? Should the family violence assessment be done differently?
Look, I don't think so. It's the same process. You're still engaging with people, and I assume undertaking some sort of assessment about their well-being and then providing advice and support. So I wouldn't see any reason why the questions would need to be different. The key is knowing what to do once the person that you're talking to indicates that they are experiencing family violence. So that's the big one for me. The conversation, I think, is fine, whether it's over the phone or face-to-face, but having that next step ready, an understanding about safety planning and risk management, and to be able to connect them straight away with a specific family violence service like 1-800-RESPECT is the key there.
Thanks, Jane. We do have another question from Fran. She'd like to know, can we have some hints on how to convince the women or the woman she is in grave danger?
I guess, given that the bulk of that presentation was taking you through what the evidence says, what the research tells us that indicates a woman is at high risk, is taking her through that, letting people know that there's a whole range of things that we know lead to really serious and violent outcomes for women, and this is them. So it's stalking and harassment and obsessive behaviour and high levels of alcohol use or whatever they are, but I've just been through them for you. But I think actually taking women through that, and again I would strongly recommend that this is done by a family violence specialist or in consultation or with supervision from a family violence specialist, but letting women know what the research says and what we know as professionals about the risks around family violence and the factors that contribute to that.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jane. We do have another question from Terry. What would you recommend if someone is placed at risk?
So I'm assuming we're talking about someone that Terry's perhaps working with, but generally if you identify that risk is present, safety planning is important, so talking to the woman or whoever it is about her immediate safety and how you can ensure that she's safe. And then, so safety planning, there's a whole range of things, and you can get further information about that on the 1-800-RESPECT website. So safety planning is a very important factor. And then a referral to a specialist, a family violence specialist, if you can, linking them in. The workers themselves, you can ring 1-800-RESPECT and get advice from professionals on the phone as well there. So obviously the website and the phone line for 1-800-RESPECT are available to you.
Okay, great then. Thanks, Jane. We have just had another comment come through from Terry. She's just clarified that placed at risk and wanting no further contact.
From their partner, no further contact from their partner. Again, look, it's about safety planning and then risk management. So we know that separation and not wanting any further contact is a point at which women can be at increased risk. So it's about getting support for that client from a family violence specialist, I would think, to ensure that there's safety wrapped around the process of her moving on or leaving that relationship.
Great, thank you. We have had another question come from Viviana. She'd like to know, do you feel these tools are useful for culturally and linguistically diverse clients?
Look, I think they are, but need to be used in the context of that culture. So certainly the webinar next month will give you greater insight as to how you can work with cold clients, but I think the risk factors are evidence-based, and I don't think they're culturally specific in any way. So certainly, as long as they're used through the lens of an understanding of that culture, I think that's appropriate to use them in that way.
Great. And Rajnish would like to know, what should we include in a safety plan?
So generally a safety plan includes things like an emergency contact. So who can the person who's escaping violence have on quick dial in their mobile phone to get help? Making sure that women have a bag packed, for example, so that they can quickly get what they need for themselves and their children if they have to flee. Making sure they have a plan for if they need to get out of the house quickly and they know where to go and who to call. If they're going to consider separating, that they've talked to a family violence professional about planning around that, because we know that will increase the risk, so considering an intervention order and things like that. But in the here and now, I guess it's about making sure that the woman has access to money, a credit card, support at very short notice.
Okay, and Libby would like to know, is sexual assault of victim one of the red flag risk factors listed in the Victorian CRAF?
Yes, so we covered that off. Sexual assault was, I'm just looking back through my, sexual assault is a risk factor.
Great, okay, that's all of the questions that we have had come through to the chat box for the moment. So just one last reminder, if anyone would like to ask a question, please type that into the chat box now and Jane can answer that for you. Okay, so there doesn't seem to be any more questions coming through. So thank you, Jane, for answering all of those questions, and thank you very much for that fantastic presentation. Thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. Please stay logged in to take our short online survey. At the end of the survey, you will be provided with a link to our discussion forum where you can discuss comments. Please note that case-specific information cannot be posted on the online discussion, and Jane cannot answer any case-specific questions. We thank you in advance for your feedback and wish you a pleasant afternoon. Thanks, Jane.
Thank you.